Hello everybody, we are here. We're actually here a day early. If you're paying close attention, you'll probably notice my videos always come out Wednesday and Saturday. But I think what I'm going to do here now is start bumping my Saturday video up to Friday and have a third video come out. I think that's what I'm going to do. I think the third video do like on Sundays and have that be like my weekly update kind of thing, right? I've been doing those two main updates per month, one like kind of middle of the month and one sort of at the end of the month. And those just, number one, just get so long. But number two, I started doing them that way because I didn't think I'd have enough to talk about every week. But I'm starting to feel like I probably do, right? And maybe it'd be more fun to do them each week and have them that way. And also, I think the other thing in terms of like how I record these videos is just with my schedule, I usually will record, multiple videos all at once. And sometimes based on the schedule that I want to release things, that means I'm recording my update video a week early. And it's just kind of weird, right? It's just, I don't know. It doesn't feel quite right. And I don't have as many thoughts to share on some things as I could. And I don't know. It's kind of odd. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And that should be fun. And that means that this is, day early. And then we'll have even more content, more conversations to have. That should be really cool. So I'm looking forward to that anyway. And hopefully you guys are too. But I'm going to do it anyway. Today, I want to talk about the Drizzt series by R.A. Salvatore. And I've read a bunch of these now. I'm 4 of these big 25th anniversary collection editions in. I'm 4 sub-series into the overarching series, 13 total books. So I think I have enough now to where I can talk about this a little bit. And that's what I want to do. So what is The Legend of Drizzt? Right? This is the story primarily centered around Drizzt, who is a Drow elf, and the journey that he goes throughout his life, basically. And, we start the first trilogy that was written here again by R.A. Salvatore was the Icewind Dale Trilogy, where we see Drizzt and friends go on this big adventure. And then we go back in time and see a prequel trilogy for Drizzt in his sort of coming of age, his origin story. And then we go back in front after the events of the Icewind Dale Trilogy and continue from there. So at least so far, I don't know if there's more prequels or anything that are done, but that's kind of the timeline thing that we're dealing with. These are set in the world of Forgotten Realms, which is from Dungeons and Dragons. And a question that you'll see a lot of people have is, do I need to play D&D to understand these books? And the answer is absolutely not, right? While the characters are basically D&D characters, you have the Drow elf ranger, you have the barbarian warrior, you have the dwarf, and, the wizards, and you have all these things that your classical D&D classes and races, and you'll see references to spells that the wizards are using, and maybe they needed to gather some items beforehand in order to be able to cast that spell, or, you might see some things like that, but there's really it's not like crunchy, right? There's no numbers, there's no dice rolling, there's nothing like that. These read exactly like a normal fantasy story. You don't need to know any of the rules of D&D, any of the game mechanics, anything, right? You can just simply walk in and read these like they're a normal book. The world building, the magic, the characters all fit within the framework of D&D, but that's really it, right? If you could walk into these and like, if you didn't know that they were in the D&D world, you would never know, right? It just is a fantasy book. So I think that fear can be put aside for anyone who might be worried about that. These are very classical fantasy, right? They have a lot of those tropes. They have a lot of those kind of predictable storylines at times, although certainly not always. But sometimes some things are just very straightforward, and that's not a bad thing at all, dude. None of that is bad. Some of that that's why I love these stories. That's why they're so fun, is because it's like, man, it feels like home base to a fantasy fan. It's just, you have the elves and the wizards and the dwarves and you have the magic and the sword fighting and the dragon that comes to, it's guarding its treasure and you got to go kill it. And, there's just all the classic traditional stuff that we know and love. That's what this is, and there's a lot of other ideas too, primarily with Drizzt, right? We see a lot of just intense depth with his character, because the way that Salvatore does this in the books is they're divided into parts, usually 4 to 5 parts in each book. And between each of those is a little interlude that's sort of like a journal entry from Drizzt, from his perspective, in the first person. And they're him reflecting on recent events, or just sort of what's going on in the world, what's going on in his life. And there's so much there that they've actually published an additional book called The Tao of Drizzt, where they collect all of those into like a hardcover edition, and it's really cool. I'd love to get that at some point, but it's so cool. There's so much profound nuance to those discussions that Drizzt is having, those journal entries that he's just sitting there reflecting on things. And there's so much about love and what life means, and there's so much about purpose and about how he's navigating hardship and how he navigates jealousy and how he is rationalizing some of the more violent, darker things that he's been forced to do, or maybe things that he wasn't forced to do, but he did, and he regrets, and he's trying to process those emotions and work through it. There's so much there, dude. There's so much there, and Drizzt is such a compelling character. And as we've kind of gone through the series, some of these other more flat, one-dimensional characters are starting to turn out to not be quite so flat, right? We have some additional depth that's being added to them, which makes sense with this many books. You can tell a lot of stories, and that's just been really cool and really gratifying and really satisfying as a reader, right? So let me kind of talk about each of these in a little bit more depth. So I began my journey with Drizzt as a little kid, reading these completely out of order, not really understand what was happening, but I would go to the library with my mom and my brother, and I would just I was like, oh, there's something cool on the cover, right? And I would kind of try to read it. And there was a handful of them that I got through and didn't really understand what was happening, but the memories that I do have are all very good, all just pleasant, fun, adventure, epic fighting, they're just good memories. And that's what made me go back and revisit this as an adult. It's like, I want to actually know the story. Let me actually read these books in order and see what's going on with these as somebody who can coherently understand everything that's going on. So what I did is I went back and I started at the beginning of publication order with the Icewind Trilogy. And the cool thing about these 25th anniversary editions is they have the entire sub-series all in one volume. There is, I believe, 33 books in the Legend of Drizzt series, and then now I believe he has begun additional books. I don't know if it's like a sequel or if it's just a continuation under a different name or something like that, but I think there's at least 3 more on top of that. So there's like 30 something books of these that are out, and they're divided into these sub-series, kind of like the Realm of the Elderlings or some things like that. So it makes it much easier, much less intimidating. And also each individual book is like 300-400 pages long, and they're super fast paced, right? So it's not a huge commitment. But anyway, the Icewind Trilogy, this is the Crystal Shard, Streams of Silver, and the Halfling's Gem. And this is, again, that very nice 25th anniversary edition that they only did the first 4 series of. So I bought these nice ones, and now I can no longer have a matching set of everything, which is a little bit upsetting. But what are you going to do? Anyway, this is your classic, magical artifact, and the company of adventurers are going out to save the kingdom, and shenanigans ensue. Every member of the company has sort of their different strengths and weaknesses, and we're seeing all of this stuff kind of go on, and all these different interactions that they have with each other and with other races, other creatures. There's a lot of really cool fighting. Drizzt is notorious for his 2 scimitars that are just, he's a master swordsman. The animal companion of Guinevere is just the coolest thing ever. This small onyx statue of a panther that he summons with magic that becomes this massive panther. It's, I wouldn't call it giant, but it's certainly larger than a real panther is. I think one of these has her on the cover. She looks about normal size in the cover anyway, but she's larger than normal panthers, right? And obviously extra strong, extra, fearsome to her enemies, but incredibly loyal to Drizzt. But we have that. We have the dwarf. I don't want to spoil anything. I'll just leave it as we have Brunor the dwarf. We have Wolfgar the barbarian. We have Cattie-brie the human who was raised by the dwarves, so she's got some extra little cultural things going on. Wolfgar, of course, also being raised by the dwarves. And so they all are these separate races, but they all have these little idiosyncrasies, these little quirks that make them, it's a slight twist on the sort of traditional character trope of each of those races. So that's always really interesting. But this is it's just a fun ride as we see these adventurers who start off in really, pretty humble beginnings, go through this adventure, gain renown, gain some fame along the way as they go to reclaim Mithril Hall, the fabled home of the dwarves in the mountains. And it's just such a fun ride, dude. It's just look at the cover. I mean, come on, right? It's so fun, that classical fantasy, all of these just wonderful tropes that we know and love. And it's fantastic, and I fell in love with it, right? Reading this again as an adult, I was just like, yes, dude, this is what I want. I want more of this. So then I went back and read the next trilogy that was written in the series, being the Dark Elf Trilogy, and this is the prequel series of Homeland, Exile, and Sojourn, where we are seeing Drizzt as he grows up in the Underdark in Menzoberranzan, and he's learning his swordcraft, he's learning his... they're attempting to teach him the religion and the culture of the Drow elves, which are just brutal, horrible creatures. And one of the best things about this trilogy is not the coming of age story of Drizzt. It's not even his internal struggle with being taught these things about the Spider Queen and about what's right in Drow culture and how things are done, and his struggle with just being like, man, that just doesn't feel right. My father taught me differently. My father was Zacnafane, Drizzt's father, who is this, he's different. He stands out, right? He's weak in Drow eyes, but he's teaching Drizzt some things that we, in this real life world would see like, yeah, that's the right way to do things, right? But so Drizzt has this constant internal struggle, and that's super interesting. But I think what really, really shines is Drizzt just having to navigate this incredibly dark world where we're seeing a lot of house politics happening. And the house politics between the different Drow houses, that, to me, is the thing that makes this truly special, because we have this classical setting, but it's very focused just on Drizzt here. We don't have the other. This is a prequel, right? It could get bogged down in, okay, here's another training arc scene, right? Or okay, we're gonna go learn our swordcraft. We're going to the wizard school. We're going to all these things. But there's all this maneuvering, all this political maneuvering between the different Drow houses that's happening in the background, and sometimes not so much in the background. It's at the forefront, and that is, oh man, that's been one of my favorite things about these books, and I couldn't get enough of that. And the journey that stuff forces Drizzt into is so interesting. The different gender roles that the Drow have, so interesting. The religion and the monsters and everything that's going on in the Underdark. The setting itself of the Underdark, right? It's just, man, if you liked Icewind Dale, you will really, really like this. Some people start with this. I think that's fine, but I personally would strongly recommend beginning with Icewind Dale, because then you see all the characters. You see the world, you see where Drizzt is in his relationship with others, and then when you go back and see his backstory, I think it recontextualizes some things in Icewind Dale that really makes it even more of a beautiful and endearing journey with this just phenomenal character of Drizzt Do'Urden. So that's what I would recommend there. But there's so much, there's some like Lovecraftian horror going on with some of the monsters that are in here. This is it's dark, right? It happens in the Underdark. There's a lot of darkness in this trilogy, which I really appreciated, I really loved, whereas the Icewind Dale was a little bit more fun, and there's darkness in there, of course, too, very high stakes, but it just felt a little bit more fun and adventurous. This one is darker, right? So I really appreciated that. Then we flash back, right, to after the events of the Icewind Dale trilogy, and we see the Legacy of the Drow. And this one's a little bit different because this one's 4 books instead of 3. And this is, again, picking up right at the end of Icewind Dale. And again, why I love reading this in this order that I'm recommending is it's picking up at the end, but then it's bringing in a bunch of the stuff that happened in the Dark Elf Trilogy. And it's melding those two things together. The first 3 books, especially, of this little, Tetrology, are the perfect blend of these 2 earlier trilogies. The perfect blend. And the Legacy, Starless Night, Siege of Darkness, Passage to Dawn. Those are the 4 books here. The first 3, to me, are the best that the series had ever been. I was so in, dude. I read these. Like these are just phenomenal. I'm so here for this. I love this so much. And just the progression of everything, the ramping up of everything, the escalation. Passage to Dawn, book 4 of this. I've talked about this on my Instagram. I've talked about this. I think I did a town square for John and Talking Story. I've talked about this before. Book 4 in this series was a massive letdown for me. It was just so different. It felt like an afterthought. It felt like a standalone that was kind of boring except for the very end that was just tacked on here. It didn't feel like an ending. The ending of book 3 felt like a conclusion to the trilogy. And then there was this 4th book that's like, oh, this is also part of this series. And I'm like, what? Really? And it's just, there's stuff that just felt like it was coming out of nowhere. And, we spent a lot of time doing certain things that didn't feel very important. And with characters that I didn't really care about, new characters, didn't really care about. A big reveal that I found incredibly predictable, and which I think is somewhat just due to it being a very classical, traditional fantasy story. It's a trope that we're not strangers to. Maybe that's why, but I wasn't blown away. And it was really disappointing. And I took a lot of time away from the Drizzt books after that. I just really needed a break because I was like, dude, I can't handle it. But those first 3 were just phenomenal. You can see on the cover here, hopefully you can see it through the camera. This is a duel between Drizzt and Artemis Intrari. And these 2 are rivals throughout these books and throughout this whole series so far. We see this rivalry, and it's so interesting because Drizzt, who is a Drow elf with the principles of a human, with the emotional intelligence, the what's right and wrong, all those sorts of things of a human, he's going up against repeatedly his rival of Artemis Intrari, who is a human with the emotional bandwidth and the principles of a Drow. And that juxtaposition is so interesting, and they're both master swordsmen. They're very evenly matched, and it's so fun to see the cat and mouse and the back and forth. It's so cool. So it's absolutely fantastic up until that big stumbling point at the end for me, which was rather unfortunate. After some time away, though, I did eventually come back here to the Paths of Darkness trilogy. And this is the Silent Blade, the Spine of the World, and the Sea of Swords. And I just finished up the Sea of Swords a week ago or so it's fresh in my mind. I came back. The Silent Blade, book 1 of this, was solid, I'll say. I didn't love it, but I certainly liked it more than the previous book that ended this that let me down so much. So I came in and I was like, okay, well, this is better. We'll see where it goes, right? And I loved the symbolism of the title of the Silent Blade. This is really picking up right after the events of the 4th book here that let me down, and it's exploring a lot of the deeper emotional journey of one of our characters who is not Drizzt. And we don't see a ton going on with the rest of the party. It's a little bit more focused on him, but it still is very. It still has that classical feel. It still has that fun, adventurous feel, but it certainly is not the same magic that those first 10 books or whatever had for me, or 9 books had. Then we get into book 2, The Spine of the World. Again, I love the symbolism of the title. I think Salvatore is getting better and better as these books go on. I think his prose is getting better. I think that the symbolism and the metaphors and things like that, I think, are getting better. So I really appreciate that with the titles, especially for whatever reason that just stands out to me. But book 2 here is Drizzt is not in this book at all, and only one of our party of adventurers is in this book. It's split halfway between him and then also a completely new character. And while the new character, I did enjoy her journey. I actually liked it better than the familiar character that we have. I actually, really I really enjoyed it, to be honest. I thought it was super interesting. And there's a sort of a convergence at the end, as you might expect. And I thought that it was really well done, and I thought that it was very meaningful, and I thought that it was very interesting. But the book as a whole was just kind of boring. I don't know, it just really dragged. I felt like it could have been shorter. I felt like there was a lot of repetition. I felt like it just didn't have that magic. And I think some of that is because, Drizzt is the driving force behind this series for me, for sure. His character is phenomenal. And the interaction between Drizzt and others, right? Those things, that's what really draws me to this. And him not being in that book at all was rather disappointing. So again, I took a big break before book 3, because I was like, okay, now I really, my expectations are very, very, very much adjusted. And maybe the series is just changing, But eventually I did come back to go into Sea of Swords. And it started out with a bang. It started out, the first couple of chapters, I literally wrote it down in my phone. I was like, this is why I love this series. This is the thing. This is great. Drizzt is back. The whole company is back. It's super action-packed. It's funny. It's got all the things that I love. And I was like, okay, here we go. Faith is, I'm starting to see a little bit more payoff of my faith in the series before, and why I didn't just completely give up. And now we're going and we're seeing the journey that this other character from the second book, or really the first 2 books here, the journey of his life and what he went through in the first 2 books while we weren't spending much time with Drizzt. Now we're seeing that stuff come back. That new character that came in book 2, she plays a role. And we're seeing all of it coming together to where now it's, in retrospect, very satisfying, very earned. And I'm not sure that those things would have felt as earned as they do if we didn't have that big just jaunt in books 1 and 2 of this trilogy. And while I did not enjoy those nearly as much at the time, in retrospect, I do think that they were necessary to get the payoff that Salvatore gets here at the end in this 3rd book of this trilogy. Because this 3rd book was just phenomenal. I flew through it. It has fully restored my faith in the Drizzt series, and I'm really excited to continue it. Whereas before, I've been kind of just trudging my way through these last couple of books, and that's a good feeling, man. That's a really good feeling. So it's been a very interesting reading experience for me. Once I hit this stumbling point here in book 10, stumbled there a bit. Books 10, 11, and 12 were just kind of like, I don't know about this. And then book 13 really turned it around for me, and I'm very excited to continue. So I think up next, I have the Sellswords trilogy, which is very exciting because that's going to go back to some of the stuff that I was talking about with the Legacy of the Drow, where we're bringing all the stuff with Artemis and Trari, all the stuff with the Drow, and what I expect will be a lot of the house politics and things like that, that the story's focused on them. I know it's focused on them. It's not focused on Drizzt and that company of adventurers. It's focused on these other guys. And that having that expectation coming in, I think, will be helpful. But also because I love Artemis, I love Jarlaxle, I love all of the Drow, just all of the that mercenary group and that whole situation that's happening in the Underdark. That's it was at the forefront to an extent here. We haven't heard about it in a while, and I'm really excited to get back to it and see everything that's been going on there before we pick back up with Drizzt and company later in the next trilogy, which I believe that next trilogy will be the last ones that has any book that I checked out as a kid. I've kind of had 1 or 2 books here and there from some of these that I read as a kid and have now reread as an adult and got way more out of. And I think the last one that I really remember reading as a kid is The Thousand Orcs, because it just had a cool title and a dude fighting a bunch of orcs on the front, and I love Lord of the Rings, and so I remember picking that one up as a kid. But I think that'll be the last one that I have any memory of whatsoever. So then from there, it's all uncharted territory, and that's pretty cool. That's pretty exciting. So let me know in the comments, have you guys read any of the Drizzt books? If you have, how far into the series are you? What do you think? What's your journey been like? Has it been like mine, or has it been different? Have you loved everything? Have you hated it? What do you think? Talk to me in there. That's my favorite part about doing this. Is it's so much fun. If you like the video, give it one of those thumbs up. I know it's super quick and it's easy to forget, but it really does seem like it helps the videos out, which is pretty cool. And last thing, if you liked it, you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. It's always fun to grow and just see the channel get bigger, and it's really validating and gratifying. But at the same time, the best thing about it is as the channel grows, I get to talk to more people. I get to have more fun conversations. I get to make more friends. And that's always super, super, super fun. So thank you for hanging out with me as I rambled for God knows how long about Drizzt in this series that has been a roller coaster of a ride for me. But overall, man, I'm very, very happy that I have taken this journey, and I'm excited to continue it. So yeah, talk to me in the comments. See you next time.